ACC, spring focus here. We got to start at Clemson. We got to start at quarterback. This is the most obvious point of focus for anyone up and down the Atlantic Coast Conference. Last year, even if things started to go sideways, which they did early on, and it looked like DJ Uiagalelei wasn't quite playing at the level we all thought he was, it just was what it was. That's what you had to tell yourself. In fact, I guarantee you, a lot of folks in Rock Hill, South Carolina, for example, where they're watching us tonight, if you are a Clemson Tiger fan, I know that's Gamecock country, but if you're a Clemson Tiger fan there, you're watching and you're saying, on one hand, I don't like what I'm seeing from DJ. That much is true. On the other hand, looking at our depth chart here, nope, nothing there. It kind of is what it is. Well, this year, let's hope that we don't have to get that far. Let's hope you don't have to look at the TV screen again and say, ooh, DJ, not looking good again this year. But if you do say that, maybe this year it's not just it is what it is. Maybe Cade Klubnik comes in, who's a five-star true freshman, and maybe he makes you say, all right, I don't like what I'm seeing so far, but now we've got an option. Dabo Swinney knows how important this is. He has been very open about this and spoken about how it's a good thing that Klubnik is in for the spring. He's talking about giving him a ton of reps. They got to see what they have in him, because they've got to see really if they have two legitimate quarterbacks that they feel comfortable going into a game week with. And I think it's going to end up being the case. A lot of people have very high hopes for Cade Klubnik. I am one of them. Fairness, they had high hopes for DJ Uiagalelei. It's not like we're writing the guy off. He's been a starter for a grand total of 1 year. But if that is the worst case this year, and the worst case is, got another five-star on deck here, let's try him out. That's not the worst place to be in the world. Down the road, a considerable ways at Miami, what would you ask? What's your biggest area of focus? Would you be asking about quarterback? That's fair. You could just be asking about the entire staff, because everyone in the house is brand new. I'll tell you what I am focused on. I should note, by the way, Brandon Marcello did this full feature the other day. I took a lot from the cues that he listed because he had a number of good points to make. I think Hummer did the SEC piece for that matter. But at Miami, there are some really, really atrocious numbers in the Department of Tackling from last year. In fact, the last 3 years, they were very poor tackling team. Tackling. I mean, I don't know that you get the best read on this in spring football, but my goodness, they were 127th in FBS in tackling last year. That puts them dead last. Worst Power 5 tackling team in the country. And it wasn't a good thing. When your head coach was a former defensive coordinator, you want your thumbprint on the program. And if you're a defensive guy and that's your thumbprint, it kind of gives you a pretty good indication why they felt like it was time to move on. Like I said, this is not the easiest thing to gauge. A lot of times you're just thudding in practice, period, no matter what time of year it is, but especially in spring. But at the very least, when we get to the spring game, we'll get to see somewhat a vision of that. Kevin Steele's the defensive coordinator there now, for those who haven't kept up. So let's keep an eye on Miami tackling. What about in Tallahassee? What about Florida State? Florida State, the theme with the Seminoles, to me, is the same version of Auburn's theme when we talked about the Tigers there in the SEC. It's not one position I'm focused on. It's just the program overall. It's the general level of play. Mike Norvell's entering his third season. The first year was that COVID year where they didn't get spring, so they weren't doing anything this time 2 years ago. But there isn't one bright, blinking red light on the program. There are a number of areas they've had a varying degree of deficiency in. Now, to his credit, and we've talked about this in the last 2 weeks, Mike Norvell didn't come in and preach anything other than that. He didn't come in and try and fool people. He didn't come in and promise the world year one or year two. He didn't say, give me 12 months and we'll have this thing turned around. He knew. He did an honest assessment, and then he was honest with his fan base and his boosters and whatnot. They have massively relied on the portal. And so now when you got that plus a couple of recruiting cycles under your belt, if you look at their roster, it's his. It's his team now. Doesn't take as long as it used to, especially when you use the methods that they've used. How do you get to 8 wins? If you talk to most Florida State fans, that 8 number, it's a very common number. They look at it and they say, if we could get 8 wins out of this schedule, that would, no matter how we got there, that would definitively lead me to believe we're on the right track. You could achieve that with 7 wins or 9 wins, but 8 wins. Where do you find 8 wins? What level of play do we have to be at to meet that 8-win threshold? It's a very realistic goal. I think it's attainable. You're looking at the schedule right now for Florida State in 2022 if you're watching on YouTube. Duquesne, we talked about the pronunciation there. We've been doing flashcards in the newsroom there. So Duquesne to open. They do have LSU this year. do the Florida State Seminoles, but it's a workable schedule. It's an ACC schedule. It's a workable schedule, 8 wins. What kind of level of play are we looking at? Georgia Tech's a program we haven't talked about in a hot minute around here, so let me touch on them because it's kind of the same theme at Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, at the conclusion of last year, there were a lot of folks who thought that there was going to be complete staff overhaul. And there almost was, but not at the head coaching position. So Jeff Collins is still there, but he replaced, I believe, 6 of 10 assistant coaches. So I think it was Marcelo who pointed out in the feature, normally when you've got that, either it means you've had a ton of success in year 4 or year 3, and therefore some guys got poached and you're having to overhaul in year 4. Rarely, though, are you seeing a coach overturn that large a chunk of his coaching staff in year 4? Because most of the time, if you're having to make that much change voluntarily, it normally means just everyone got fired. But that's not the case at Georgia Tech. Kind of a happy medium, minus the happy. And so Jeff Collins has got a lot to prove this year. They also lost a lot of guys to the portal. They lost, at last check, 12. They've had 12 guys transfer out of there. But look, that sounds like it paints a picture of a no-win situation. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think a lot of times when you've got a formula that has not worked, change is not the worst thing in the world. So, I would venture to think inside that building, whereas you look at these numbers and you say, well, if we weren't screwed before, we are now. I bet there's a little more excitement around there. You don't ever relish in people losing their jobs, but it's just, you've already tried one way. It doesn't really make much sense to keep doing it the same way. You just kind of pound your head against a wall. It's not like they don't have familiar names walking around there either. Chip Long is the offensive coordinator there. Chris Winkie is the quarterback's coach there. To give you an idea, it's not like they brought in or elevated grad assistants to all of a sudden major Power 5 assistant coaching positions. The overall level of play. It's the same question as we have at Florida State. Lastly, there's new coaches in both of the major Virginia schools. You got Brent Pry at Virginia Tech and you got Tony Elliott there at Virginia. This was an unexpected head coaching change, though, at Virginia. Tony Elliott, former offensive coordinator there for a while at Clemson, he goes to Charlottesville, Virginia. He's the head coach at Virginia now. They got a huge offensive line rebuild. I mean, a big one. And I know you talk about a lot of them. Oh, we got to replace 3 starters. They'll trade places with you instantly if you offered it to Virginia. Listen to this. So they've had 21 kids exit via the portal. Not on the offensive line. That would be a record. They've had 21 kids total exit via the portal. The offensive line has just been the position group that got the most gutted. They've lost 6 offensive linemen in one cycle. They've lost 3 starters. They did pick up 2 grad transfer offensive linemen, but they won't be there until the summer. So right now, as they're going into spring, unless something changed in the last 24 hours, they've got 1 offensive lineman on the roster with any experience, starting experience. So not the most enviable position for a new coaching staff to inherit, but that is what it is at Virginia. So I think a lot of people from, again, the old 50,000-foot spring view, they're probably going to look at Virginia. And anybody who ever believed in Tony Elliott, they'll look and they'll say, oh, Tony Elliott plus Armstrong's still there, the quarterback, so he gets a returning starter at quarterback. Maybe they'll be a pop team in year 1. You better have an offensive line to play behind. They don't have it right now, so it could be a rough year for them unless some real magic happens in development and then probably the post-spring transfer portal too.